And we're back at Cambridge Inside Out here. Um, Again, it's still March 5th, year of our Lord, 2024. And what I wanted to next mention here is we had a city council meeting last night. I mean, I'll just talk about the two most recent meetings, which is the last one since we had another show. And what were some of the big items on that agenda here? So again, I have to do a little quick sliding around here to access this, but here we go. All right, so again, we talked a little bit about the finance committee here. Now, at the March 4th city council meeting, the big items on the agenda were, I mean, I guess it's always a matter of opinion, but something which has been anticipated for a long time has been the final report from the Police Executive Research Forum, acronym PERF, that was called for in the wake of the police-involved shooting back in late January, or actually early January of 2023. There was, I think in October, there was a preliminary report basically saying that there was absolutely no basis for which you could charge a police officer, and that by any reasonable standard, the police officer involved in that shooting had acted pretty responsibly. Again, there's always going to be questions that you can ask. So now that that report, on which I guess I have to, unfortunately, because of the way things are configured here, I have to actually do a little moving about. Actually, no, I think I can do this directly here. So I'm just going to open up that report here right now. Okay, so here we go. We share the screen, and here we go. So this is basically the cover letter from the city manager and from the police commissioner, Christine Elo, basically giving the lowdown on the report. So again, it was an analysis. Really, it was not singularly about the police-involved shooting a year ago. It was really more of an evaluation of the entire department's program for things, and I think it was pretty substantial. It's a 56 or something page. So I'm not going to go through it. It gives a lot of the specific analysis of the police-involved shooting. I think it's extremely informative. What I'm going to do here, and I probably should have queued this up a little better, it gives a lot of very particular recommendations, but what I was trying to do is I think it get to page 28 here. So pardon me for flashing this all by here, just to kind of cut to the chase. So in the end, there's a lot of specific recommendations. I think all of them are very, very good. Basically using sort of best practices from all around the country about how best to handle situations like this. Actually, come to think of it, I think it was actually on page 50 somehow. So pardon me for scrolling crazily through this here. By the way, they do actually recommend a co-response model, which is a little bit, I think, really what our now community safety department is finalizing now, right? So here's the conclusions, which I think are worth noting here. Again, acknowledging the fact that a police-involved shooting or any death is a tragic thing. It does rather loudly state that it was these happen so rarely, especially in Cambridge, like once in more than every 20 years in a city the size of Cambridge. They basically come right out and say it's a testament to the training and protocols already in place at the Cambridge Police Department, right? And I like the way they say this, that the city and its police department would use a tragedy to improve an already strong department is laudable. And that's really how I look at it as well. Cambridge Police does many things well, including prioritizing de-escalation. They do make some very, very useful suggestions on how they can improve things. And I think it's been, considering additional less lethal equipment options. I think we do not, there's no, as far as I know, there's no plans to be using tasers, but there are some other plans. We'll see. Anyway, the one other thing is, I know it was mentioned some months ago, but I think it deserves reiteration, namely that there was a lot of call for, release the names of the police officers who were involved in that incident a year ago. And they were, city staff and the police department were accused of somehow, being resistant to that. But there were reasons based on restrictions from the district attorney about what they could and couldn't do. But I do like the closing statement, one of the closing statements here, which is that the Cambridge Police Department has a long history as a forward-thinking, trauma-informed, state-of-the-art police department. Its members are already trained far more than those of other police departments around Massachusetts. And what they make quite clear is that actually, as a result of this, Cambridge will become, and I'm just going to step out of this now, Cambridge will actually become the first municipality in Massachusetts which will have an explicit policy about how and when to release names of police officers who were involved in the shooting. People were somehow making this statement that somehow Cambridge was somehow being exceptional, and they would quote a few other cities like Detroit or Baltimore or other places around the country. But what was really relevant was the fact that there was not a single place in Massachusetts that had a policy about releasing police officer names when there was an incident such as this, leading to death or great injury. So now Cambridge will be the first. So I think it speaks very well of the Cambridge Police Department and the way everybody handled this ultimately. Again, learning trauma-informed, right? You learn, from a bad incident, and you sort of try and do your best to make the best of it. So anyway, that was one of the significant things from the meeting. Not the only significant item from the meeting. I'm going to, again, pardon me for having to kind of navigate around here a little bit here. But the other thing of great significance was that the city has been engaged in what they're calling the Central Square Lots Study. And that's actually happening kind of parallel with a renewed attention to do some additional rezoning work in Central Square to achieve certain longer term goals, whether it's increased density of housing, hopefully more than just that. But anyway, so what and I'm on the Central Square Advisory Committee, so we certainly had our pass at taking a look at the Central Square City Lots Study. And for those who don't know, it's the lot that currently where Starlight Square is operating. There's another small parking lot up the street from that. There's the parking lot behind that runs. It's a city-owned parking lot that has a stormwater basin in it, and it's behind the relatively new Mass and Main building. There's parking lots. Actually, there's what used to be the Citizens Bank building, which is being eyed as the probable or preferred location for Central Square Library to move, which would then free up some of the space in where the current library is located, over on Brookline Street. Pearl Street. And and what happens there is anybody's guess. Many people are talking about putting in some very significant high-rise housing there. We'll see how well that flies. But anyway, it was well anticipated. This was sort of coming here. And again, I'm not going to dwell on all the particulars of this here, but the study took a look piece by piece at all of these city-owned assets. And more. It wasn't just the city-owned asset. There was a little bit of attention to some non-city-owned assets as well. basically make some recommendations about what the preferred uses might be for each of these, which was very interesting. Now, I think I'm going to just sort of dodge out of this, though, just to sort of talk about it. You know, you can, this is available here. You know, there was a fair amount of discussion among city councilors. I think all of them chimed in. You know, it's like Central Square is oftentimes feels like a forgotten place, but whenever it gets put in the center of attention, then suddenly every city councilor loves Central Square until they don't, right? You know, but what made it maybe a little bit more interesting was that the day that they were speaking about this at a city council earlier in the day, the Central Square Business Improvement District folks had sent us a message letting it be known that this will be the last year for Starlight Square, you know, which is the when it's in Lot 5, it's at the corner of Norfolk and Bishop Allen, which didn't surprise me because honestly, it was a great idea that was done as an accommodation during COVID. It had a pretty golden period of a couple of years there, but it has been diminishing in its value, in my view. It's been getting shabbier and shabbier. And I don't want it to go away, but ultimately I think it has to go away. And hopefully then, not hopefully, but must be replaced by a comparable public space, a square within a square, as some have called it. And it seemed like every one of the city councilors has now is having a love affair with Starlight Square, you know. Uh, Now, some of the city councilors were complaining that in the preparation of this study, that they didn't put nearly enough attention on community feedback. You know, they kept throwing the number that they only talked to 250 people. I don't think that's accurate, but you know, it was it was a very weird paradoxical discussion where on the one hand, it sounded like the city council is saying we need to go back and talk to more people. But then in the next breath, we're saying, Mr. Manager, let's start moving now. You know, and the manager seemed quite perplexed by this because saying, well, councilors, are you saying we need to go back and study more? Or are you saying just hop to it and start getting some plans in the works? So kind of a mixed message. I think the city is going to putting out now what they call a request for information to go get a better sense from potential property developers for what could be done and what could be, you know, within the confines of the constraints of what the city wants from everybody. They will simultaneously then be working on a rezoning package for Central Square, which hopefully will implement some of the recommendations that were part of the now decade-old K2C2 study, the C2 part of that. And then goes out the request for proposals from specific developers to do this. One of the things that I'm a little worried about is that city councilors still have an obsession that the only kind of good housing in Central Square is affordable housing, meaning deed restricted, income restricted housing. And, you know, yeah, sure, I think most everybody wants to see a fair amount of that, but I think they're kind of mistaken if they think that, I mean, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, every stick of affordable housing is a net burden on the operating budget for the city in perpetuity, right? So it just the math doesn't work, you know. So unless you're planning to do something more in the spirit of inclusionary zoning, where you put in a certain percentage of market housing and a certain percentage comes with that of so-called affordable housing, if you want to do it, make it 100% affordable, it simply doesn't work. It's gonna ruin it's gonna completely obliterate our excess levy capacity, and basically we'll all be paying through the nose. Now, one of the things that I'll just sort of mention this because, you know, my role with the Central Square Advisory Committee, when we had our little pass of this, one of the suggestions that I made pretty emphatically was that in doing the planning, I was wondering, why are we only looking at city-owned assets? The fact of the matter is, some of the greatest potential of the Central Square, which really ought to be part of this discussion in my mind, are some of the lots that are actually not owned by the city. So for example, the lots at the corners of Bishop Allen and Prospect Street, which are that's auxiliary parking for the large building that's at the corner of Prospect and Mass Ave. But yeah, we've eliminated parking minimums now, so I think you can make a good case that there ought to be some redevelopment of some of those properties. And I don't think that the city should be just saying, okay, private developers, you do what you do, city planners, we do what we do. I think they ought to be talking to each other. If you really want to make a great city, you don't just sort of live in your own silos. You sort of do a much more comprehensive long-term plan that basically partners both the private and the public sectors. I was very pleased to hear the city manager make reference to that. I don't think it was necessarily because he was reading my comments, but maybe because he's a smart guy and he just sort of sees that that's a good way to do things. I'll just give you one quick example. Right now, there's a parking lot at the corner of Green Street and Pleasant, which is a relatively small parking lot. It's adjacent to the building which currently hosts the Needle Exchange, which is privately owned. It's just rented, but eventually they'll seek new tenants there. So maybe that private property owner and the city should be talking. That would be a really great site to do something much more comprehensive than just doing two separate mini projects. So anyway, um, some of the city councils addressed this. I was kind of entertained a little bit when the Mayor Simmons, mentioned that there were 44 years and 24 studies and showed a slide. I said, gee, I know that slide. It was like right off of my webpage. Basically, the never-ending study of Central Square, which is, I mean, I don't say that to be mean. I'm just always trying to point out that we have spent decades, really over 4 decades, talking about Central Square. And not saying nothing's happened, but relatively little has happened, and many of the ideas just keep coming up. Every 10 years, the same idea gets floated, and there's just minimal action on it, you know. And I certainly hope that making something happen in Central Square doesn't just mean making everything bigger. I mean, Central Square properly has a lot of potential as a cultural district and as a place which could just be like a draw, something that people are just dying to go to because it's going to be so cool. You know, I used to say to the folks down at MIT, the real estate people, I said, where's the mini golf course? Why aren't you putting in the miniature golf course down in Kendall Square? And what I really meant was, do something interesting, do something fun, do something that people will come to, and don't just sort of say, we need to stuff a lot more 100% affordable housing in here. And that doesn't necessarily make Central Square a more interesting place. It make it a little bit more affordable, possibly. But even that I consider to be personally debatable. It should just be more interesting. I mean, where's the movie theaters? Where's the new Starlight Square? Where is Starlight Square 2, which hopefully will be better than Starlight Square 1.0. All right. And I just think we have to be a lot more creative than we have been in some time, and maybe a little bit more adventurous. And I don't know that the city necessarily is the party to do all that. And that's why I think partnering with some of the private property owners is really, especially if you can have a thoughtful, creative property owner who's willing to take some risks and to try something out because it'll be cool, And there are some property owners who I think are oriented that way. So I hope we can make some movement on that front. Now, one thing I just want to say, which is really a sad matter, but it was also noted at not only the most recent city council meeting, but the prior one too, which is that a friend of all of ours, Paul Ryder, who was head of recreation for the city until he retired a few years ago, passed away recently. And there's, really sad. I mean, one of the hard things about living in a city and embracing your Canterbridgianness is that you get to know people and then you're sad when they pass away. Now, there will be, for those who knew Paul, on this Thursday, March 7th, there's a gathering up in his hometown in Stoneham. He was living in Stoneham. starting at noon, cocktail hour and greeting, words of remembrance at 1, reception and celebration 2 to 4. This is all at the Bear Hill Golf Club at 2 North Street in Stoneham. So if anybody's watching this was a friend of Paul's, you may want to go to that. I think it'd be great. Just one note, I could say this. This is a great statement. I thought it says, when he moved in 1982, he moved on to the city of Cambridge to serve as the director of recreation in the Department of Human Services programs, while not knowing a single person in Cambridge. When he retired in 2016, he may have known every person in Cambridge. I don't think that's exactly accurate, but it's not too far off. I think that's a hell of a statement to say about anybody, really. And some of the things that have been associated with Paul over the years, he played a role, left a mark on getting the jazz festival, helping make that happen, the Fresh Pond Golf Course, turning into what it is today. Dennehy Park, Paul came in 82. Dennehy Park wasn't really around until like 1990, 91, right? West Cambridge Youth Center, he's always contributed to the old timer baseball game that happens every August, and more. So anyway, I think it was necessary to sort of mention Paul's passing. A couple of other quick things. The something that I talk about it, at length, seems all the time. It has to do with the current charter review process. So the charter review process is over. So now the final report went to the city council, and I think it was in the several weeks ago. When the report came to the city council, it was it was kind of a little juggling act with people who were wanting to get some control out of this. It's pretty clear to me that Councilor Nolan, and I'm pretty sure Councilor former Mayor Siddiqui, want to grab this and bend it to their will. But it was successfully referred to the Government Operations Committee for the first pass, first review, as well as the Law Department Election Commission for, just to investigate all of the facets of this that need to be addressed. One of the things that I pointed out to Councilor Toner, and I put it up on a website as well, is that if you think of a city charter as pretty much covering all bases about city government, the one thing that this charter review committee didn't take up at all was the fact that there were certain parts of city, what are effectively parts of city government, that were created via special act of the legislature. And I don't know that they even realized that that was sort of part of the city, and they didn't talk about it. And I hope that at least in the process to come, that they at least mention the fact, and somehow maybe they don't have to change anything if they don't want. But the role that the License Commission plays is different in Cambridge compared to some other places in terms of the authority to issue licenses. It's not done by the local legislative body. It's in the bailiwick of the License Commission. Our election commission itself is actually formed via special act of, I think, 1921, which is different than other cities, which has just a board of registrars. And how the election commission is put together with 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, being vetted by city committees and such, that's all sort of part of what's special to us. The traffic board, which was long forgotten but has now been reconstituted, at least formally, right? It was a special act of 1961, but it is part of our city government. So where does that fit in? I mean, it's not exactly a department, whatever. So I think there should at least be some mention or some reference to some of the things which are part of our city government that are not necessarily woven into the fiber of the charter. Even our interrelationship with the Cambridge Health Alliance, where our city manager appoints a rather substantial number of the members of the governing board of the Cambridge Health Alliance. So that's kind of part of our government. We don't have the city hospital anymore, but we have this relationship. Why isn't that discussed? Cambridge Housing Authority, there's no mention of that either. But in fact, that was created with, in conjunction with the legislature. Even the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority, which is now apparently going to even be brought into the conversation and be part of the mix of the Central Square, anything that happens in Central Square. There's no mention of that, even though that is a part of the way our government is structured. Right? And as I've mentioned many times in the past, there are certain aspects of the way we do our elections, which are unfortunately welded to a 1938 law that needs to be updated. And I think we are going to see some changes in that. At least I hope so. And so that should be coming. So anyway, not a whole lot more time here, but I'll mention that I think it was in the previous meeting, which was, I believe, was it February 26th? There were a couple of housing related orders that came in. One of which was calling for a local option, like basically a real estate transfer tax, to support affordable housing initiatives, right? And there's some discussion about that, like, because there's already fees extracted whenever there's a real estate transfer from the state. And there is some controversy about this. But again, it's like as if we don't spend enough, we want to just keep taxing more in order to put more and more money into an affordable housing system, which I'm not going to claim causality here, but it seems like the more we fund it, the more the gap of affordability grows in Cambridge. Sometimes I wonder if you simply eradicated a lot of our interventions, whether in fact we might actually get better results. But that's me. Another idea that was floated, or actually not more than floated, proposed, was the creation of what they call municipally funded housing vouchers. Now, I thought to myself, if you're going to be dropping $1 million per unit into affordable housing projects, if you took that money and instead used it to basically create vouchers so that people could go out and pay for their housing, you might actually get more housing affordability at less cost. But I think the way this was proposed was to say, no, let's not take a penny out of our current affordable housing agendas. Let's add on even more money for municipally funded vouchers. And if ever there was going to be a budget buster of ginormous proportions, that would be it. And this is all happening meanwhile, the finance committee is meeting with the city staff, talking about our need to curtail our budget growth. So I think there's going to have to be a lot more discussion on a lot of these topics in the days to come. And we'll kind of see. By the way, just to wrap up here, just mention that PERF report, about police has been referred to the Public Safety Committee, and they will be having a meeting coming up on Tuesday, April 2nd, I think it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, to sort of look at that report and the recommendations. It's not really in the purview of the city council, quite honestly, but the fact that they'll be reviewing it, I think, is something of some interest. So anyway, on that note, I'm going to take my leave here, and we'll see you soon again on Cambridge Inside Out.